I can't forget what happened to me that night. I never thought I would be on the verge of life and death. When you work the night shift, you learn that darkness has its own rules. I'd been working at Elroy's Deli for 6 months, a tiny convenience store on the edge of Bramblewood. A neighborhood that wasn't outright dangerous but had an edge you could feel if you lingered too long after sunset. It was the kind of place where people minded their business, but every so often you'd hear about something. A mugging, a break-in, a fight that got out of hand. I didn't mind the job. It paid enough to keep the lights on in my apartment, and I didn't have to deal with crowds. But the nights could get strange. That particular night started out quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you uneasy, like the city was holding its breath. It was a Wednesday, just after midnight, and the usual sounds of crickets and distant traffic seemed muted. The store was empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly as I restocked the shelves. The only other noise was the hum of the old security monitor on the counter, cycling through grainy footage from the 2 cameras out front. I was halfway through stacking cans of soup when I heard the chime of the front door. A customer. Finally. "Evening," I said, glancing toward the counter. The man who walked in was off. He wore a tattered hoodie and jeans that looked stiff with dirt, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He didn't respond to my greeting, just nodded slightly and wandered toward the back of the store. I kept an eye on him as he paced the aisles, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't shopping, he was watching. Every so often, he'd glance up at the security cameras, his expression unreadable. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "No," he said, his voice low and flat. He lingered for a few more minutes before grabbing a bottle of water and a pack of gum and heading to the counter. "That all?" I asked, ringing him up. He didn't answer, just nodded again and handed me a crumpled $5 bill. As I made change, I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were on me, even though his hood obscured most of his face. "Have a good night," I said, handing him his receipt. He didn't reply. Instead, he stood there for a moment, as if debating whether to say something. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out. The chime of the door echoed in the stillness, and I watched through the window as he disappeared down the street. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, brushing off the encounter as just another odd customer. But when I glanced at the security monitor, my stomach dropped. The man was standing just outside the store, barely visible in the grainy footage. He wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the camera, his hood still up. I stared at the screen, waiting for him to walk away, but he didn't. After what felt like an eternity, I grabbed the phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. "Bramblewood Police," a bored voice answered. "Hi, this is Eric at Elroy's Deli. There's a guy outside the store acting strange. He came in earlier and now he's just standing there. I don't know what he's doing." The dispatcher sighed. "Is he threatening you?" "No, but he's freaking me out. Can you send someone to check it out?" "We'll send a car if we have one available. Stay inside and lock the doors." "Thanks," I said, hanging up. I walked to the front door and turned the lock, the sound louder than I expected. When I glanced back at the monitor, the man was gone. I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Probably just a guy with nowhere else to go, I thought. But then the phone rang. I jumped, my heart racing as I picked up the receiver. "Elroy's Deli," I said, my voice shaky. There was no response. "Hello," I repeated. Still nothing. I was about to hang up when I heard it. Breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing, like whoever was on the other end wanted me to know they were there. My grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this?" The breathing stopped, replaced by a faint clicking sound. And then, a voice. "You shouldn't have locked the door," it said, low and almost amused. The line went dead. My hands shook as I replaced the receiver, my mind racing. Was it the man from earlier? How did he get this number? I checked the monitor again, but the parking lot was empty. Grabbing the phone, I dialed the police again. "Bramblewood Police," the same voice answered. "It's Eric again," I said quickly. "That guy? He just called the store. He said something strange." "Strange how?" He told me I shouldn't have locked the door. There was a pause on the other end. Are you sure it was him? Who else would it be? I snapped. Calm down, the dispatcher said. We'll send someone as soon as we can. Just stay put and don't open the door for anyone. I hung up, my pulse pounding in my ears. The rest of the night dragged on, the silence stretching unbearably. I kept checking the monitor, but the parking lot stayed empty. By the time the police finally showed up, it was almost 4 a.m. 2 officers stepped inside, their expressions tired but alert. You called about a suspicious person? One of them asked. I nodded, recounting everything that had happened. The officer scribbled notes on a small pad, nodding occasionally. Did you see where he went? He asked. No, I admitted. He just disappeared. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. We'll take a look around, he said. They left, and I watched on the monitor as they searched the parking lot and the surrounding area. After a few minutes, they came back inside. Nothing, the officer said, but we'll keep an eye out. Call us if anything else happens. Thanks, I said, though the word felt hollow. The officers left, and I locked the door behind them. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. As I left at sunrise, I glanced back at the store one last time. In the reflection of the glass door, I saw him, standing at the edge of the lot, his hood up, watching me leave. The next night, I tried to shake off the unease from the previous shift. I told myself it was nothing. A guy with nowhere to go, just being weird. But as I clocked in at 10 p.m., I couldn't ignore the way the shadows seemed to stretch longer, or how the usual hum of the store felt heavier, like the place itself was holding its breath. Around midnight, the stillness outside was almost unbearable. The occasional car passing by on the main road felt like a lifeline, but the sound disappeared as quickly as it came. I had just finished restocking the drinks cooler when the chime of the door startled me. I turned toward the counter, my heart skipping a beat, but no one was there. Hello, I called, stepping around the counter to get a better look. The store was empty. I checked the door, but it was closed. The motion-activated chime had gone off, but there was no one to activate it. I shook it off, blaming the glitchy old system. But when I glanced at the security monitor, I froze. In the grainy black and white feed, a figure stood at the edge of the parking lot, just outside the glow of the streetlight. They weren't moving, just standing there, almost blending into the shadows. I squinted, trying to make out their features, but the camera's resolution was too poor. I stepped back to the counter, my eyes fixed on the screen. My hand hovered over the phone, debating whether to call someone, when the figure finally moved. They took a single step forward, just enough for the light to catch them. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an old jacket with the hood pulled up. His face was partially obscured, but I could see enough to make out a scruffy beard and sunken eyes that seemed to stare directly into the camera. My stomach churned as he took another step forward, his movements slow and deliberate. Then he stopped. I waited, my pulse pounding in my ears. He didn't move again. After a few minutes, I picked up the phone and dialed the police. Bramblewood Police Department, a calm voice answered. Hi, this is Eric at Elroy's Deli, I said, my voice trembling. There's a guy outside. He's just standing there, and it's weird. Is he threatening you? The dispatcher asked. No, but he's creeping me out. Can you send someone to check it out? We'll send a car as soon as we can. Stay inside, and don't engage with him, the dispatcher said. I hung up and glanced back at the monitor. The man hadn't moved. 20 minutes later, the chime of the door went off again. I jumped, my heart racing, but when I looked at the counter, there was still no one there. I walked over to the door, checking to make sure it was locked. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from outside. I froze, my hand resting on the door handle. The tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone knocking softly on the glass. My breath caught in my throat as I leaned forward to peek through the blinds on the door. The man from the parking lot was standing right outside, his face pressed against the glass. His hood was still up, but I could see his eyes now, wide and unblinking, staring straight at me. "Can I help you?" I called through the door, my voice shaking. The man didn't respond. Instead, he raised a hand and tapped on the glass again, his fingernails scraping against the surface. I stepped back, my pulse racing. "Look, you need to leave," I said, trying to sound firm. The man tilted his head slightly, like he was considering my words. Then he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was slow, deliberate, and chilling. His teeth yellowed and uneven. He tapped the glass one last time before turning and walking away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the parking lot. I locked the door and checked the monitor, but the parking lot was empty again. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the image of his face, or the way he'd smiled at me. The next morning, as I was leaving my shift, I noticed something on the ground just outside the front door. It was a single shoe, worn and muddy, with a piece of crumpled paper stuffed inside. I hesitated before picking it up, my hands trembling as I unfolded the paper. Scrawled in messy handwriting were 3 words: "See you soon." I dropped the paper and shoe, backing away toward my car, my eyes scanning the empty parking lot. I didn't see him, but I knew he was still out there, watching, waiting. I barely slept after the last shift. The image of the bloodied handprint and the crumpled note with "See you soon" kept replaying in my mind. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something heavier, like the shadows of the store had followed me home, lingering in the corners of my room. I almost called in sick, but I convinced myself it was just a prank. A sick, twisted prank. When I clocked in that night, the store felt different, heavier somehow. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder than usual, and the air smelled faintly of something metallic, like rust. The first couple of hours passed uneventfully, though I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept glancing at the security monitors, half expecting to see someone standing in the parking lot again. At around 1 a.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold. A soft tapping. It wasn't coming from the door this time. It was coming from the back of the store, near the storage room. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. No answer. I grabbed the flashlight from beneath the counter and slowly made my way to the back of the store. The tapping grew louder as I approached, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone was knocking on a hollow surface. When I reached the storage room, I hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, the faint light inside casting long shadows on the floor. "Who's there?" I demanded, forcing strength into my voice. The tapping stopped. I pushed the door open with my foot, shining the flashlight into the room. The shelves were stocked with boxes and supplies, but nothing seemed out of place. Then, I noticed the door to the loading bay. It was open. I had locked it earlier. The sound of something scraping against metal made me whip around, my flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. "Stop messing around," I shouted, trying to mask the fear in my voice. The scraping sound stopped, replaced by a low, shuffling noise, like something being dragged. I followed the sound to the corner of the room, where a stack of boxes blocked part of the wall. I shone the flashlight over the boxes and froze. A bloody handprint streaked across the wall. Fresh blood. A chill ran down my spine as I backed away, my flashlight trembling in my hand. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper, so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Eric." I spun around, the light darting wildly. The room was empty. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Eric." I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. And then, from the shadows, something moved. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as the figure stepped forward, I realized it wasn't. It was a man, dressed in dark, tattered clothes, his face gaunt and pale. Blood smeared his hands and shirt, and his eyes were wide and unblinking. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and raspy. I gripped the flashlight tighter, ready to swing it if I had to. "What do you want?" The man tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "You locked the door," he said, taking a step closer. That wasn't very nice. I backed away, my hands shaking. Stay back. The man stopped, his lips curling into a faint smile. You'll see, he said softly. Soon. Before I could respond, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. I ran back to the front of the store, locking the door and grabbing the phone. My hands shook as I dialed the police. Bramblewood Police Department, the dispatcher answered. It's Eric from Elroy's Deli, I said, my voice trembling. There's a man in the store, he's dangerous. You need to send someone now. The dispatcher's tone shifted. Stay calm. Is he still there? I don't know, I admitted, glancing at the security monitors. The feed showed the empty aisles and the parking lot outside. Stay on the line, the dispatcher said. Officers are on their way. I paced behind the counter, my eyes darting between the monitors and the front door. Then the power went out. The store plunged into darkness. The hum of the coolers silenced. Hello, I said into the phone, my voice shaking. The line was dead. I grabbed the flashlight, its beam cutting a narrow path through the darkness, and made my way toward the front door. That's when I saw him. The man stood just outside the door, his face inches from the glass, his wide eyes staring straight at me. In his hand was a long, serrated knife, the blade glinting faintly in the moonlight. He raised a hand, pointing at me with one bloodied finger, and mouthed a single word. Soon, the sound of shattering glass filled the air, and I realized with a sinking feeling that the front door wasn't going to keep him out. The sound of the door crashing open echoed through the store. My heart raced as I backed away, clutching the tire iron in my trembling hands. The man with the knife stepped into the storage room, his face twisted into a cruel smile. Nowhere left to run, Eric, he said, his voice low and taunting. I didn't answer. My grip tightened on the tire iron, my knuckles white. You don't have to do this, I said, though my voice betrayed my fear. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Oh, but I do. You've seen too much. He took a step closer, and I swung the tire iron with all my strength. The metal connected with his arm, and he cried out, stumbling back as the knife clattered to the floor. I didn't wait. I shoved past him and bolted out of the storage room, my legs trembling as I raced toward the front of the store. Behind me, I heard him recover, his heavy footsteps pounding against the tile as he gave chase. Come back here, he roared, his voice echoing through the aisles. I darted around a corner, knocking over a display of canned goods in my haste. The cans clattered to the ground, scattering in all directions. The man cursed as he stumbled over the mess, giving me a few precious seconds to reach the counter. My hands fumbled as I grabbed the store phone, punching in 911 with shaking fingers. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered. There's a man in the store with a knife, I gasped. He's trying to kill me. The operator's tone shifted immediately. Stay on the line. Officers are on their way. Are you in a safe location? No, I shouted, glancing over the counter. The man was back on his feet, his face twisted with rage as he closed the distance between us. I dropped the phone and grabbed a heavy flashlight from beneath the counter. As he rounded the corner, I swung the flashlight with all my might, catching him across the side of his face. He stumbled, crashing into a display of snacks, but didn't go down. You're going to regret that, he growled, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip. My chest heaved as I backed away, my flashlight trembling in my hands. Why are you doing this? I demanded, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he lunged at me, his hands outstretched. I swung the flashlight again, but this time he caught my wrist, twisting it painfully until I dropped the weapon. You should have stayed quiet, he hissed, his grip tightening. I kicked out, my foot connecting with his shin. He grunted in pain, loosening his hold just enough for me to break free. I ran toward the door, praying the police would arrive in time. The man chased me, his footsteps relentless, but just as he lunged for me again, the sound of sirens filled the air. He froze, his head snapping toward the flashing blue and red lights outside. For a moment we stood there, both breathing heavily. Then, without a word, he turned and bolted toward the back of the store. I collapsed against the counter as the front door burst open and 2 officers rushed in, their guns drawn. "Hands up!" one of them shouted, scanning the store. "He went to the back," I cried, pointing toward the storage room. The officers nodded, one staying with me while the other pursued the man. Minutes passed in a blur as I sat on the floor, my head in my hands. I could hear the sounds of a struggle in the back, shouts, the crash of something heavy falling, but I couldn't bring myself to look. Finally, the officer returned, his face grim. "We got him," he said simply. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Is he alive?" I asked hesitantly. The officer hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, but he's not going anywhere." They led the man out in handcuffs. His head hung low but his eyes blazing with fury. As he passed me, he spat on the floor. "This isn't over," he snarled. I shivered, the weight of his words sinking in as the officers hauled him outside. The rest of the night was a blur of police statements and cleanup. The bloodstains on the floor, the shattered glass, the overturned displays. It all felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. As the sun rose, I left the store, my body heavy with exhaustion. The police assured me they'd keep me updated, but their words felt hollow. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end.